Hey, welcome back to another episode in the Simple Nutrition Insights podcast. I am your host, Leonila Campos, registered dietitian, and today I have a guest, Jasdeep, and I'm excited to talk to him and talk about men and mental health. And so I'll let him introduce himself, and then we'll start with the interview. Hi, Jasdeep.
Hi, how's it going? Yeah, my name is Jasdeep. I work in a private practice as a mental health clinician. I have my master's in social work from the Jewel of California, Fresno, and that's it. I'm really interested in men's mental health, partly due to kind of like my own upbringing and my own experiences as being a man.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for sharing that and also for coming to the podcast. You know, it's interesting because in the dietetics field too, right? I did some research too, right, in the sense of the social worker area, right? And I found, and I can link that website too that has the
Yeah,
statistics. But
yeah.
you know, I found out that about 16.1% of social workers in the U.S. right are men, and then it gives the breakdown right of ethnicities, right?
Yeah.
And so in your experience, right, and just becoming a social worker, right, and getting your master's in social work, I'm sure you saw that also, right, that not a lot of male were going into that career of social work.
Yeah, no, there were I think there were like in my cohort, there were only like, was it four guys? And one of them, another guy was a Marine. And then, a couple other guys, and that was it. Yeah, that was it. My entire program, there were only four of us.
Yeah, that's really interesting, right? It is a women-dominated field, even for dietetics too. So what got you into social work, you know, or going into into that field? Like what made you decide to go into that field?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, like, so there's, they always say like hindsight's 2020, right? So reflecting on my past, I can point to many instances where I realized I was like, oh man, like I'd love to be a social worker, a mental health clinician or something. But I think one of the most important ones for me was, I think, leaving the military. I was in the Marine Corps for 4 years. I served as an infantryman, a rifleman, and from 2006 to 2010. Getting out of the military was one of the kind of most disorienting experiences, and I knew it was the same for a lot of my friends as well. And that kind of like impulse to want to help them, this desire to help, and I don't know if it was for myself at the time. It was just kind of a mishmash of emotions that I was trying to make sense of that I couldn't at the time. So I thought, community work, which is really deeply tied to my tradition as well, which is the Sikh tradition, really kind of propelled me in the direction to find any kind of work that led me to work with, either underserved populations, veterans, and any individual in that kind of like capacity.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so
Perfect. Okay.
and so now you're working, you know, in a private practice, and usually you're seeing your clients,
Mm-hmm.
and I really, you know, it's fascinating to see how culture plays a role, right? And we're not going to go in super detail about that, right? But because I do also see men in my practice, right? I mostly see women that come to me for nutrition services, but I also see men in my practice, right? And oftentimes they're not used to people, right, asking them about their emotions, about their stress, or how they
Mm.
handle stress, or how they feel about eating. And so these are questions that I ask, right? Because if they're coming to me because, for example, most of them come to me for weight loss, right? I want to be able to understand where maybe their root cause is, of like if there's overeating, right? Or if they're skipping meals during the day and they're just eating more in the evening. I want to understand why, right? Of course, I love that as clinicians and as health professionals, we are
Hmm.
able to refer patients, right, to other professions. So I
Yeah.
always refer my patients that are struggling with depression, or they don't know, right, that they have these really deep emotions, to therapists, because that's way out of my scope of practice. But in order for me to be able to help them, right, in the nutrition aspect, we have to be able to address the underlying reasons. And so oftentimes men, right, my male clients, they have no idea that they're struggling, right, for example, to overeat in the evening because they are super stressed, right? And they come home
Hmm.
and they're like,
Hmm.
I feel out of control. Right? I feel like I ate
Yeah.
my dinner, but I continue to eat and I don't know why, right? Or I had a really stressful day and all I want to do is come home and have a piece of cake, right? And I feel so good. Now, as
Yeah.
a dietitian, I understand, okay, there's the food aspect is what's, helping you feel better, right? But we're not addressing the issue, right? We're not addressing other ways of also helping you feel better, that have nothing to do with food. And so,
Yeah.
in your expertise, right, why do you think that this is not talked about, right? Like, why do you think that men, right, or males don't talk about their emotions as much?
Yeah, I think so. I think when it comes to, let's say, just discussing emotions, I think one of the things is that, you know, being kind of aware of how to respond as well to someone that's being vulnerable also isn't really kind of instilled within us, right? Like nobody grows up thinking like, hey, look, if someone's depressed, and they're coming to you, how do you talk to your boy, right?
Right.
Um, and I think there's this kind of guys just miss each other, right? So my habit was like, hey man, like how you doing, bro? And I was like, oh, I'm kind of struggling, and I kind of like, I'm like, oh damn, it sucks, dude. And I'm sure it feels cathartic in that moment, but it doesn't never really kind of goes beyond that. And so within therapy, especially when guys come over to my sessions, one of the things I do is first I kind of like try to normalize the fact that like, hey, look, as a guy, and I always make it a point to mention some way, shape, or form, my service in the military because they put a lot of stock into that, right? This idea that, like, okay, he was in the Marine Corps, he must have some sort of tough guy credentials, right? And as a result, like he's giving me permission to, hey, dude, it's okay to kind of feel weak sometimes. We all do, even as a former Marine. I've had my days too. So, and I kind of normalize that because I think internally every male wants to kind of just release, let go, relax, and kind of like really kind of bring themselves down from whatever thing that's tormenting them. But also because like guys across the board, can be very and I don't want to play, flat image because it is changing. A lot more men are talking about mental health, and I'm seeing it in the office. However, I think one of the reasons why people are unwilling to is because it's a painful experience. What do we uncover when we kind of tap into their histories, right? What do we uncover when we ask, in a more meaningful way, like, hey, dude, like, how are you doing, man? What's up? Talk to me. And I think that pain is difficult to deal with and to confront, especially in kind of the environments they're probably already in. So you're constantly, maintaining this at ready kind of orientation towards the world, which, forces you to not really have to sit with your emotions, but instead you either drink it away, smoke it away, or you bury it.
Right.
Is that good? Is
Yeah.
that good?
I love that you're mentioning that. And I also love that you say, normalizing, right? And I am so happy that,
Yeah.
we're seeing it more, right? That male or men are coming to, therapy more, and they're reaching for help, right? They're looking for help
Right, right,
because
right.
I can imagine how it must feel, right? Like having these really strong emotions and not knowing how to deal with them,
Process them.
right?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Like I've worked in the foster care system in the past, and when you ask these boys, like they're very angry. And look, there's always multiple dimensions to it, right? There's one about like culture, one about income inequality, one about systemic racism throughout history. It just and this it can be very, but at the most basic, I try to approach them with this kind of idea that like, hey, dude, it sucks to hurt, it just sucks. It really just sucks. There's no other way about it. Tell me when it sucks, what do you do? Like who do you turn to? What are the things that kind of help bring peace to you? And some guys, they're, a lot of guys like blue collar workers, usually turn it to alcohol. And so, yeah, normalization is so, so important.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And because then once you know, right, okay, yes, I'm having these emotions and this is what I do, right, to help me. We might not see it as a healthy way to do it, right? But as why they're
Yeah.
coming to a professional where maybe you can work with them and give them some tips. So if,
Yeah.
let's say we do have somebody like that, right? That, okay, I'm dealing with my emotions, on the weekends by drinking, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Like maybe what are some of the tips that you would recommend to someone that is having these really strong emotions and they recognize, right? Oh, now I know that because I feel this way, and then I drink alcohol or drink just in general, I forget about them, right? But I want to be able to not do that.
Yeah. So if they don't want to drink anymore and they're kind of struggling with alcohol, so it really depends on, the severity of their drinking problem, right? If they are, functioning alcoholics and, uh, I'm very much about, uh, kind of slowly reducing their alcohol consumption, kind of jumping into it, quitting cold turkey works for some, others it doesn't. Because for many it functions as a kind of a quick band-aid, right? And also there's kind of cultural norms, right? That if I'm going to go to see a football game with my buddies and I don't want to drink, but everybody else is drinking, okay, like we have a society that's built around alcohol
Mhm.
consumption. And so when we talk about triggers, for example, the triggers are never ending, right? And how much can an individual really like what internal strength can they draw on to really kind of say, look, no, I'm not going to do this when the triggers are, right outside as you leave the house, the commercials you see, the films you see. And so in that sense, I think first is helping them recognize that like, look, this is the environment you're in, right? So understand why alcohol is always in the home is because it's always present everywhere you go. Um, and so kind of going from there, then I try to at least establish kind of like a path of like, slowly reducing from, let's say, like, I don't know, like a case a day. I've like I've served with Marines that, them and I used to share a case a day, and start off very early in the morning. And so, and it was really kind of slowly reducing that, but also bringing them in and helping them find different ways to recognize what triggers their desire to drink, what leads them to want to say, man, I need to drink, right? Um, the other thing would be then to slowly kind of give them the tools, have someone to turn to. You can even, I do encourage people to go to AA. I do encourage people to, connect with a sponsor that, can keep them accountable. And I think that's just like the entry point, right? The kind of like the entry point into helping them improve, because I think when it comes to trauma, you have to kind of build up to that type of processing work. For that, people are at different places at different times.
Right. Yeah. I love that you talk about that, right? Not one person is going to be the same, right? And they are all going to need different things, right? Different interventions
Yeah.
and support. And so that's definitely awesome that you're talking about that too.
Yeah,
Because
like
they
it goes back
yeah,
to like insight, like what kind of insight do they have regarding their own suffering and their own struggles? Yeah, absolutely. It's different for everybody, but typically there's, one or two formulas that we can use to kind of approach them initially.
right. Yeah, and I love that you also talk about giving them the tools, right? Of course, you're bringing the awareness, right, of the environment and the reasons why those actions happen. Okay, but
Right.
now what, right? Okay, now let's give you some of the tools that you can use to help you, right, change that and
Hmm.
that support. Because I feel that that's also the same with nutrition, right? Um, we feel first we do the awareness, right? Okay, how are we eating, right? The same thing, environment, right? Our environment plays a huge role in our decisions, in our subconscious, right? Because a lot of the times we might do things that we're trying to change, but because we've done them for so long, it's like automatic, right? We just do them
Right.
automatically.
Yes, absolutely. And
And
the thing about that is, I have to point out, is that like it's not as if these companies don't spend billions of dollars in marketing research, to kind of like create the colors of their signs, in a very particular way that, I understand like with food, for example, fast food chains very particularly use different specific forms of color that when you see them, there's almost like a trigger response, right? You see it and you're like, oh man, it would be nice to have a Big Mac or something. Happens to me every time I go on the freeway. Like if I see a McDonald's, I'm like, oh man, a Big Mac would be nice right now with that sweet Powerade, right? And so, yeah, on top of that, there's, the triggers are all around us. And so,
right,
it really comes back to like helping them also be aware that they are also in an environment that is not the most conducive to dealing with alcoholism. So to help them recognize the environment they're in, as well as their own internal struggles, I think gives them kind of a couple of ways to kind of address, the internal and external triggers.
right. Yeah, amazing. And I'm sure that doesn't happen overnight, right? It takes time to be able to
Oh
do
my God,
that.
yeah, yeah,
And then also that is not always like a straight line, right? We're gonna do,
yeah.
it's gonna be up and down. The journey is gonna be up and down. So now I think it's important to talk about, the feelings of guilt, right? Or maybe the feelings of failure. If we're struggling with something specific, right? Or if we're having these really strong emotions and we feel that it's our fault, right? Like everything that is happening is our fault. And I feel that if we're having those feelings too, right? Almost it feels paralyzing to even do anything about them. Like how do you deal with that?
Like guilt is something that I really feel like is one of the things that really propels individuals, especially men, to act out in kind of in ways that are counterproductive to their own well-being. Because I think like, in our society, we tend to talk about, picking yourself up by your own bootstraps, right? But, you know, uh, I guess well, there's like a long history of neoliberalism, as well as I think if it's, a few years ago, I was seeing a client who really struggled with having paying rent, right? Like it's, he, lived in an apartment and was struggling to pay rent, and really blamed himself for not being able to do that. That is a feeling that many men feel because underlying that is this assumption that men are supposed to do this, right? That men are responsible and should take on the responsibility of, but we don't live in that environment anymore where, you know, um, and there's a very real also political dimension to this that I don't have time to get into, but I think it's something that we have to think about because when we internalize this guilt, right, I really kind of encourage my clients to kind of do an inventory of well, what is in their control, what really is out of their control. Do they control market forces as it relate to kind of rent prices? Do they control the cost of fuel, things like that? It's out of their control. And so I think there's an element of like kind of recognizing the structure as it is. Now, this doesn't solve the problem, obviously, right? But the idea is that the burden they carry on themselves is not theirs to carry to begin with, right? It's out of their control. Now, when it comes to dealing with feelings of failure, of having struggled with something in the past and trying to come to terms with it, like I know that very intimately because of my own time in the military, and then I went to UC Davis, studied history and Middle East studies, and there was a lot of a guilt that accompanied my kind of participation as an infantryman specifically. And for me, I think it's really, when we talk about like, let's say self-esteem, right? We have to do acts that are esteemable, that are acts that are, okay. So the idea is that like, we're carrying this weight that we can't really ditch, right? We can't concretize, like we're trying to redeem ourselves from our previous action, but all we can really do is continue to do good going forward. And as you then reflect on your past, maybe redemption then is in that kind of, it's a real commitment to changing yourselves fundamentally. Does that make sense? So that's what I'm trying to say. So if it doesn't come across clearly, just let me know, okay?
Okay. Yep, perfect. It makes sense. Absolutely. And
Okay.
changing the
Okay.
way that we feel, right? It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work, yeah. And yeah, so like, so like if one, sometimes I see people that struggle with their self-esteem, and there's of course many ways to kind of approach it, but one of the ways that I really do encourage people to think about is service, to build self-esteem requires one to do esteemable acts, to participate in community. We're so cut off from one another. And I think social media further exacerbates that, right? Where we're alienated, we're atomized from one another, and we get lost in this kind of comparison with that person, with that specific job, and then we're constantly given ideas of what it means to live the perfect life, right? Either be through film, through the, what is it, the American dream. And I think sometimes when people don't live up to that specific kind of vision or fantasy, I even sometimes call it a fantasy, it is disorienting, but look, uh, like, what is it? Tuition fees were, almost nothing, in the 60s,
Mhm.
70s versus what they are now. And if it wasn't, for example, even the Marine Corps, I'd wonder what kind of debt I'd be in. And in that sense, I point to often to the structure around us. And then in order to kind of really deal with the guilt, I think it's in the process of serving others, and as well as sometimes it is really just about trying to process and allowing yourself to accept what cannot be changed and only changing what you can do going forward.
Right. Yeah. Um, that is so on point, right? I often also tell my clients, right, we can only control the things that we have direct control over, right? Everything else is difficult, right? Even if we want,
Right, right.
even if we wanted to change them, right, it will
Yeah,
require just massive amounts of power and energy.
yeah.
And so it's better to focus on the things that we can directly control, right? Like our nutrition or the way that we,
Yes,
move our
yes.
bodies, or more so like our independent way of doing things, right? Because
Hmm.
even if we
Yeah.
wanted to change, our partners, that's difficult, right? That's their own human, and we can change them, right? That's who they are. But we
Yeah.
can change how we react, right, to maybe things that they say to us or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, that's definitely difficult. So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Now, I think I want to ask you, right, like how do you, as a clinician, right, how do you recognize when someone is struggling with their emotions and to deal with their emotions? How do you, as a clinician, recognize that?
Yeah, I mean, there's multiple ways, right? There's multiple tells. There's multiple ways that they might even have some internal insight, or a family member has basically told them, like, hey, look, you have to go to therapy, or they've recognized themselves. So, in private practice, especially, right, they're kind of coming to us with some sort of an awareness that I need help with something. And so, whereas, like, in other spaces, and sometimes even in private practice, right, you'll have people that come that have been word to by the courts, or by, some other institution. But in this case, when they do come, there's kind of an awareness of what they've been struggling with. And then it's really through that kind of process of building a solid rapport, like a very, very close client clinician relationship, in order to kind of delve into these particular stuck points. And so what I do, let's say if I have a guy come in and he's struggling with, some emotional kind of struggle, he has some emotional struggles, is unable to process them. I just begin by asking, like, what brings you to therapy? What made you interested in coming to me? Right? What is it that motivated you to kind of pick up the phone and do this? And so then we kind of begin from there, and then as we're going through their past, or even what they're going on through their present, this is weird. I'm kind of a very visual person, but it's like, I allow the conversation to go where they need it to go, just for them to allow themselves to kind of express themselves fully, in a very safe environment. And then I ask very specific questions, right? That asks for more details, that asks for more kind of insight into so I can kind of gain some insight into what they're experiencing. And so from there, then I can see, okay, like, I've had clients in the past that, struggle with someone correcting them. And so there's this kind of defiance, there's resistance to being told what to do at work. And then it's like, okay, let's explore that, man. Like, why such an intense reaction to, let's say, recommendations from a supervisor or critiques from a coworker, right? You start asking questions, and then you see a history of resistance to parental figures who never really kind of engaged with them in honest terms, and they've had to fight to be able to kind of secure their voice in that relationship. And so then obviously every authority figure that comes around them is going to be a kind of an antagonist, right? And in terms of like protecting one's ego, what else can you do?
Right. Yeah, it's just so
Does that make sense?
fascinating. Absolutely, right? No, but it's so fascinating, right, to really, because I also like to ask my clients, right, like the same thing, like, okay, yeah, brings you to me, right? Let's talk about your
Yeah.
goals. And it's usually at first it's very superficial, right? Like the answer is very superficial, but as you ask more questions and you learn more about
Right.
their true goals, then you really
Yeah.
understand, why is it that they're here. And it usually takes, a good amount of time to figure that out. But I love that you said that you have to build a rapport, right? Because if there is not that connection and that rapport, these are things that they're, so intimate and so painful, right?
Right.
That you have to feel so one safe, right? You have to feel safety in order for you to share, right, that information and allow yourself to heal. But there has to
Yeah.
be that true rapport, right? And I see that too with my nutrition clients, and so I love that they are honest with me, and if they're not, I think as clinicians we know, right, when someone is still working through that, right, and I think they're
Yeah.
still trying to
Yeah.
figure, okay, is this really the person that is going to support me and help me? Because I've had other clients too, right, that tell me, I've worked with someone else and it's difficult, and I'm not sure if this is for me. So I'm sure that's the same with therapy, and so I think I love that you bring that up about the rapport, right, and making your clients feel safe and that they can trust you.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
awesome. So I think talking about obviously men and mental health, I can imagine how that has changed, after the pandemic, in a positive thing, right? That more mental health services have been available for just Americans in general. Um, but also the accessibility of it, right? That, hey, if you're not able to come in, go and do telehealth. So hopefully that has helped. But I can imagine just how much that has affected men and women as well in terms of like their mental health, right, after the pandemic, during the
Hmm.
pandemic, and that uncertainty, right, too. Have you seen that that change as well?
Well, yeah. I mean, like, I have many clients that work for private companies, that during, like even the pandemic, there were like supply chain kind of slowdowns. And as a result, their work was severely impacted. And, sometimes even if the work is impacted, the demand is still the same, right? And so there's a kind of like a tension there that can't be resolved because you know, uh, global shipping had been affected. And as a result, sales and marketing within the companies had kind of declined. These men are sometimes, and women as well, like women were part of this as well. Specifically, as we're talking about guys, yeah, there's this kind of feeling of like, well, how do I kind of resolve this internal tension?
Yeah.
I think, especially guys who kind of really find their purpose through their specific job, right? Or providing for their families. I think that time where they had to, be at home, or, they weren't getting the hours they needed, or they weren't essential in any way, shape, or form, was disorienting, as I said earlier, but also scary. How do you pay for rent? And this is before, like the state responded in a meaningful way. And so those questions were very pertinent at the time. And that's a lot of stress to carry, especially with the prospect of, what impact the the coronavirus can have on the body, right? If you're working in like construction sites, if you're working in environments where you're around a lot of people, I can only imagine how scary that was. And so, yeah, a lot of the clients I do see do look back on their time through, the more serious kind of lockdowns, with kind of a great deal of sadness and a lot of fear, as I can hear that in their voices when I talk to them, and so yeah, I think it does leave a kind of has left a significant impact on a lot of folks, and yeah, and we do see it quite often.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine. Even for us, right, thinking about it and just that uncertainty of like, okay, what's going to happen, right, to the world, what's going to happen to the
Yeah,
workforce, or like, and yeah, that has changed us forever for sure, right? It's a historical change,
absolutely. Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely.
right? Yeah. So I think, the next question would be like, what are some of the tips that you would give someone that maybe they know that they're struggling with their emotions, right? But they're struggling to, or they feeling that they don't know how to handle their stress, or what are some of the tips that you would give someone that they haven't reached out for help, like tips that you would give them to help them manage those feelings?
That's a great question. I think so. For any men that are listening to this, struggling with emotions, sometimes we think it's just, like, okay, like you don't see anything but those very specific emotions, right? I think one of the things, a lot of guys struggle with is shame. And, for anyone that knows that they're struggling with some, either be anger, depression, just unprocessed kind of history, traumatic history, whatever it may be, and if it really does get in the way of your ability to be present with your family, if it really impacts the way your relationship to alcohol, any of that kind of stuff, the clinicians are there to help you. Just frankly, their whole goal is to help assist you as you try to process what you're kind of going through. And we can either function as in specific moments for holding space. We can be there to validate. And then we can help you process and give you the tools necessary to deal with this stuff. I would, encourage these guys to really, see us as in some ways facilitators, where we're trying to facilitate a conversation between ourselves and our past and our history, or what we might be experiencing in the present, and to kind of just parse it up. The way I kind of describe it to some of my younger clients is as if, like, you remember those old headphones with the jacks and everything? You'd put them in your pocket perfectly, kind of, like untangled and everything. And the second you pull them out, there are all these knots and everything. And so our goal is first to kind of untangle those knots, right? And because it's hard to think through our experiences when there's just so many painful stuck points. And in developing those skills, learning those kind of coping practices as well as grounding techniques, then we can really start trying to take apart those knots, right? And then we can sit back, and as we get some distance from those experiences, we can look at them and kind of process them, and in a certain way put them to rest for certain people. And I think, don't be nervous, reluctant to reach out to a mental health clinician. It's frankly, like, I see a therapist. I've seen a therapist for, man, like 6, 7 years. And frankly, it was one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. And guys, it's having come through. I'm a high school dropout. So I have my GED, and I was a knucklehead back in the day, going to the Marine Corps. This, that, and the other, and so it's not as if, like, I'm unaware of the struggles that a lot of men go through, but it is to say that there are other possibilities, that there are other ways of inhabiting this world that aren't fully dictated by the pain that you carry, that it's okay to be kinder, softer, gentler, sweeter. I think that's one of the most wonderful parts of positive masculinity, this kind of tenderness, and so, and most of the guys I do see do have that really sweet side to them, but sometimes it takes a little bit of time for them to really inhabit it when they don't feel like they're, you know, um, in danger, or, almost at the kind of in this crisis state. And then you see it. And a lot of these guys are wonderful, that I work with. So yeah, guys, if you listen to this, I highly encourage you to reach out to a mental health clinician. They're sometimes really chill. So, and you can shop around, of course. If you don't get along with a clinician, if you go to another one.
Right. Yeah, I love that you bring that up, right? Because sometimes I do hear that, I had a session with somebody and we didn't connect or it didn't go well, right? But giving the opportunity, right, to another one, right, where you can connect and have that rapport, um, because it's life changing, right? It can really help you manage those emotions. But I also really love that you said that part of shame, right? A lot of the times I do hear that as well. Like I feel that, and I feel shame that I need help, right? But
Yeah, yeah,
we're there to help, right? We went to school for that. We are here to support you and help you, right? Um, and so I really like that you mentioned that, right? Not feeling shame because you're having these emotions, right? You're human. You're going to have
yeah,
them,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, and we're such social creatures, and prior to kind of like these very cookie cutter homes, we had communities to turn to, right? I have friends that go back to Mexico and they go to their small villages and everybody knows everybody, and there's kind of a huge network of people that you can turn to. But here it's more, we're very atomized, we're separated from one another. Obviously, as a clinician, there's always like this kind of boundary that we maintain that's very important. Um, it is to say that a lot of people don't have that anymore, and so how do you process painful experiences? Who do you talk to
Mhm.
that can reciprocate in a way that is beneficial instead of it being like a burden? So because the other side of this is that the person you're telling is also having to carry this on them, and and so there's a lot of conversations about the emotional labor aspect of it, right? Is that if you're close to someone and they're willing to do that, that's fine. But I think the kind of understanding is that nobody really wants to hear a downer, and that's, and which is unfortunate because we desperately need people that are, gentler to their bros,
Right.
and sensitive to their needs. But, until that happens, like I'll be more than happy to work with you. So
Yeah, absolutely. And
yeah.
I think that is so true for specifically for men, right? I know for us women, if we have someone where we feel that connection, we talk to them, right? We tell them pretty much everything that is happening. But for men, it's
Right.
more difficult, right? Because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be seen as
Yes.
soft, right? But it's
Yes.
just
Yes.
human nature. Like, hey, I need to let someone know what I'm feeling right now. And so if they don't have that, right, like I can imagine that heavy load. And so having a therapist, right, having a clinician to be able to listen and help you with those emotions, right, that is just, I mean, it's so needed because if you don't have it anywhere else, right, like we're essentially, yeah, that's damaging, right? Um, that's definitely a heavy load. So I love those
Yeah.
words. Any final thoughts, any final tips that you want to give to men, right, in general about mental health and, if they're needing help, any final thoughts or tips that you want to
Yeah.
provide?
Yeah. I guess my message would be simple is that, guys, I just want to validate that, like, man, like, I know it sucks out there. I really, really understand it sucks. I know a lot of folks are living paycheck to paycheck, rents kind of always around the corner. You get the paycheck and it just disappears the moment it comes in. Guys, that's not your fault. That's just not your fault. You don't control these things. They're out of your control, and obviously me telling you that doesn't make a difference, but I do want you to know that that's not your burden to carry either, and you can look at it from that angle where, like, look, I just live in this world. I didn't create it. Right. And so in that way, guys, be kind to yourself, man. Like, be gentle. There's no reason to, see what we see on TV. I know, having been in the Marines, I see all sorts of buddies that are country guys, that are city dudes, live in the burbs, and they're always some sort of kind of mimicry of some sort of idealized life that people want to present to the world. But oftentimes that's, it's a performance, if they're watching some show with cowboys and stuff, and immediately later, like, I'll see people wearing air yachts or something, and so, like, it's all like, I feel like sometimes it's very much like a performance, that, like, I'm a tough guy, and it's like, look, man, you don't have to do that around me. It's cool. And you don't have to do that around yourself either. What does it mean to just be, just to sit and relax?
Right, and be you. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you so much. Let's see if anyone wants to reach out, or if they want to, see you as a clinician. How can they contact you?
So if anybody wants to contact me, please just give me a call, 559-930-2210. Where we take all types of kind of insurances. Yeah, if you want to come in, or if you want to do telehealth, I'd be more than happy to work with you. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'll make sure to add that phone number in the show notes. So if you're driving or busy, you can always look at the show notes, and it'll be there. But thank you so much again, Jasdeep, for being able to come up and do this topic with me about mental health in men. And for the listeners, share it with a friend. If you know anybody that will benefit from listening to this episode, please share it. And that is it for today, my friends. Thank you so much for your time, and I will see you in another episode. Bye-bye for now.